this off today. This comes from the Hebrew Scriptures, the book of Genesis. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And they made brick for stone, bitumen for mortar, and then said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." And God came down to see the city and the tower which the mortals had built. And God said, "Look, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they will not understand one another's speech." So God scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. And therefore it was called Babel, because there God confused the language of all the earth. And from there God scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. The first time I ever walked into a Unitarian Universalist congregation, I had two burning questions that nagged at me. The first, being a former Catholic, was, where am I supposed to kneel? A lot of anxiety around that question. The other question nagged me for a much longer time. It took several weeks before I actually got to the answer, and that was, the heck's a UU? Heard that phrase bandied about for weeks, just couldn't wrap my head around it. UU. Incorporated into all kinds of jokes and puns, until finally my wife, who is far smarter than I, clued me in that it was the shortening of Unitarian Universalism, which indicates three things to me. First, the name of our denomination is quite the mouthful. Two, we get lazy when we engage in public speaking. And three, your minister is a little slow on the uptake from time to time. We're a denomination in love with acronyms. We use them everywhere we go. Lots of them have U's in them. Our UU congregation is a member of the UUA. We do our outreach work through the UUSC. Our ministers belong to the UUMA. They get their credentialing from the RSCC and the MFC. And hey, did you read the new blog post from the SSL campaign? Oh, and are you going to GA this year where you can work with the CSW and vote on the SOCs and the AI, on and on and on? And if you're relatively new to us or new to Unitarian Universalism, or you've been with us for years and you don't know what I'm talking about, ask me about those at coffee hour later. It's almost as if we have our own language here. Unitarian Universalism has its own little inner circle language, and that's understandable, it's normal, it's human. We tend to develop shortcut languages in the various circles with which we associate. Your workplace has its own language. I'm sure if I went to where George works, I would hear him speaking something that resembled English, but probably wouldn't understand a word of what was going on.
Neither do I.
Thank you for helping me make my point. We have our own shortcut inner circle languages in our families. And we have our own inner circle languages right here in our churches. Every church, every religion has their own little inside language. And that's fine as long as we don't confuse the inside language with the outside language. We're supposed to be talking while we're not here. As long as we all understand and agree what it is we mean when we're talking together inside this inner circle. How well do we understand that inner language? We use all sorts of shortcuts. If I talk about the principles, most of you will know what I'm talking about, even if we can't all recite them by heart right now. I can't, sorry. Or as one of our kids in the earlier service so handily pointed out, right there, that banner right there, that's another lovely little shortcut for our principles. Or if I talk about the inherent worth and dignity of all people, you know what I'm talking about, but those words might not mean anything to someone who's outside the doors of church. But they mean the same thing to us, right? David Bumbaugh, one of my teachers at Meadville Lombard Seminary, used to like to tell us that anybody could accept and get on board with our Unitarian Universalist principles depending on how they understood the language in them. His very extreme example is that a skinhead could come and join us for church one day and sit down and read those principles, read about the inherent worth and dignity of each person, and depending on how he understood that word person, could say, yeah, I agree with that, and sign the book and come down and join us every Sunday here in the chairs, and hilarious hijinks would ensue, no doubt. All depends on how you understand the words. I decided to put that theory to the test several years ago, and I asked on my blog to my huge audience if they could define for me what we meant by the word person in that first principle. What does it mean? The inherent worth and dignity of each person. What does person mean? And I got about a dozen answers. And every single answer out of that dozen was different. They shared some commonalities, but no two answers to the meaning of the word person were the same. Some people were very concrete and pedantic. Some people were so amazingly metaphysical, I couldn't even wrap my head around what it was they were talking about. Some people had a very narrow view. A person is a human being, and that's it. Some people could expand that definition of person so that it meant every living thing that we know about and don't know about. But when we're talking about that first principle, that inherent worth and dignity of each person, there was not an immediate meeting of the minds as to what that meant. And that was all from within just our inner circle. All of us who are talking that inside Unitarian Universalist language. And if there's that much confusion about what we mean when we're talking to each other inside the circle, imagine the level of confusion we might hit when we start trying to talk that language in wider and wider circles outside of this one. Back in February and March of this year, the evangelical Christian world was all in a tizzy about a book that hadn't even been published yet. Rob Bell, who is the pastor of the Mars Hill Bible Church in Granville, Michigan, had written a book with the rather provocative title, Love Wins, the story of the heaven and hell and the fate of every person who ever lived. That's a grabber. His publisher was making a huge promotional push to sell this book, and as part of that promotion, they had released a video of Pastor Bell pretty much talking about the same thing he talks about in the foreword to his book. In the beginning of the book, he describes an art show that they had at his church, an art show of various members of the congregation. And someone had created a piece of art that incorporated the words of Gandhi into it. And he came in one day to find that someone overnight had put a post-it note up on the piece of artwork that said, "Newsflash, Gandhi's in hell, end of story." To which Rob Bell asks, and I think quite rightly, both in the book and in this promotional video, really? Gandhi's in hell? You know this for a fact? How can you tell? That's pretty much the tone of the entire book, by the way. It's just asking question after uncomfortable question after uncomfortable question, challenging his audience's fairly ingrained notions of what the nature of hell was and whether or not punishment was supposed to be eternal or not. And he doesn't really come to any concrete answers in his book, but he sure made a lot of people nervous. And this was before the books even hit the stand. The evangelical blogosphere internet community was in a tizzy. "Farewell, Rob Bell," someone tweeted. How dare he preach this heretical idea? How dare he confuse us with this notion of, and here's the word that started floating around the internet that made everyone really scared, and I'm going to say it to you now. Try to remain calm. How dare he preach universalism? I've heard this word before. I wonder where. This was the horrifying concept that Bell's audience just couldn't deal with. Universalism, it's horrible, it's terrible. Meanwhile, in our little corner of the internet over here, we were saying, yay, universalism! Somebody's finally talking about us. Somebody's finally noticing. What? Evangelical mega what? So the evangelicals were decrying universalism and trying desperately to kick Rob Bell out the door of the church. And meanwhile, we were sitting here waiting with open arms for him to just wander our way. And none of that was happening, and all the while, Rob Bell laughed his way to the bank, because that book hit close to #1. There you go. You could not have planned a better marketing strategy if you tried. Worked on me, I bought it. It's fabulous. It's short. Read it.